Hey, I'm Steve, and this is Stuff with Steve, and I'm here with Nick Rodriguez. Nick is our sound engineer, producer of this podcast. Nick, how you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good, Steve. Thanks for asking. I had a lot of creative juices flowing earlier today, so it's been pretty good. And this is a retroactive announcement, but we actually shot a promotional video earlier today for this podcast that's upcoming, and I'm really excited for it.
Yeah, that was lots of fun, and I'm excited about this podcast too. And so tell me, Nick, are you actually going to watch the Super Bowl that's coming up?
I'll probably watch it, Steve, but I don't know if I'll put any money on it because football isn't something I'm super passionate about, but I'd love to watch a good competition.
You're more of a soccer, basketball guy, right?
I would definitely say a basketball guy because that's by far my favorite sport.
Okay, awesome. Hey, something that's in the news that I want to talk about today is the situation in the country of Myanmar, and it's been in a lot of newspapers and so forth with a military coup in that country. And I've been to that country 6 times, and so I get asked a lot of questions about what's going on there. I was asked by a high school student last week about the human rights oppression in that country. And I told the student, I said, well, I can have you also connect with somebody who actually lives there and video FaceTime with them. And he goes, it's due in a few hours, Pastor Steve. I don't have time for that. I thought, typical student, waiting to the last minute to do his homework assignment. That's what you did, wasn't it, Nick? Were you last
Steve,
minute?
I will neither confirm nor deny that.
Yeah, I know you're last minute. Okay, so Nick, do you even know where the country of Myanmar is?
Let's see. Myanmar. Is it between Miami and Zanzibar?
That's pretty close. No, it's in Southeast Asia, and it is next to Thailand and borders Bangladesh. It also touches China and India. And Myanmar is 60 million people and is land area-wise fairly big for a country. You know, it's the size of maybe Oregon or something. So it's a fairly large population, and 95% of the people there are Buddhists. Do you know anything about Buddhism?
Steve, I know plenty about Buddhism.
Oh, you do? How do you know something about Buddhism?
Because I took world history.
Oh, you took world history. Okay. All right. Okay, excellent. So I've been going to Myanmar for 6 years, and I got invited by a good friend to go and teach at a pastor's conference. So even though Myanmar is basically 95% Buddhist and maybe 2 or 3% Christian and 2 or 3% Islamic. We went to train pastors in just basic doctrine, basic Bible, basic theology. They don't have a lot of formal training, these pastors. About half, when I first went, there were 13 students in the classroom, and we taught Monday through Friday all day, and I taught Bible study methods and how to interpret the Bible and gave them some tools to understand Scripture well. And as we began to, that was my first experience in that country. And when I landed at the airport, there were guards, military people everywhere carrying AK-47s. And at that time, which would have been about 8 years ago, I guess, the country was still a military dictatorship. It's a communistic military dictatorship. And a little background on that country of Myanmar, it used to be called Burma, and most of the people there, 20% of the population is Burmese. And then there are many dialects. There are probably well over 100 different spoken languages in that country. And there are some major ones, Burmese, Chin, Karen languages as well. But it's a military dictatorship. The Russians tried to grab communistic power in the 1950s, and the country eventually sided with the Chinese Communist Party and was more aligned with that brand of communism. But the military ruled the country with an iron fist. And there were a lot of human rights abuses, I guess we call it persecution of people. One is the Rohingya Muslims. And thousands of Rohingya Muslims, that's a people group in that country, were killed, mass killings by the military. And in the northern part of the country, there was just a civil war, ongoing civil war and conflict with some people groups who wanted more freedom. And the military cracked down on those places. So some of my friends and pastors who live there have been in the crosshairs of fighting. So let me tell you just one brief story that gives you an idea about that. I was in an area of Myanmar, and I was teaching about the gospel. Nick, you know what the word gospel means? The root word?
Are you talking about the Latin root?
No, the Greek word. What do you know what the word gospel means?
No, Steve, enlighten me.
Okay, it means good news. This is good news. Good news, Jesus. Good news, we can be saved. So I asked the crowd, I said, hey, and there's a couple hundred people there. I said, tell me some good news that you've had. And a lady raises her hand, and it gets translated for me. It was good news the soldiers surrounded our village, and then we prayed, and they left. And I realized, holy cow, I'm in a different atmosphere. I'm not in the United States of America, where the military is surrounding villages and shooting guns and that kind of a thing. So that was some of my experience in Myanmar with just the heavy-handedness of the government. And then through the Obama administration, and I think previous administrations too, no doubt, putting pressure on that country to become democratic. And so eventually they had some elections, and a woman named Aung San Suu Kyi was elected as the president, and she had a long history of nonviolent protests against the government. And it's quite an inspiring story. Her father was killed by an assassin and he was a pro-democracy freedom person, and then she kind of took the reins of being the voice of that country for freedom. And she was under house arrest, I think, for 17 years. And I've actually driven by the house. She was under house arrest. And eventually they had some elections, but the military never gave up power. So what's happening today is the military was losing their grip because elections had ousted many of them leading the country. And so today the military is back in charge, and she is under house arrest again, along with many of her government officials. And I think it's a very scary time for the people of Myanmar, because it wasn't that long ago that there was an iron fist of rulership with the military in that country. So Christians who live there are often persecuted as well, and sometimes they're persecuted by the military, and sometimes they're persecuted by Buddhists. And what that looks like, I think, would be that maybe a pastor might hold a Bible study in his home, and he would be surrounded by a group of people who would pelt his home with rocks and threaten him and try to shut down their Bible study. So those things would happen. Many of the churches in Myanmar are house churches because was not allowed for them to own property or build churches. The last few years that's been allowed, so there have been more efforts at some construction things with churches actually having their buildings, being able to expand and so forth. So 7 or 8 years ago, there was a closed door to being able to come alongside Christian leaders, closed door for training. They desperately need training. And then there was an open door, and I had the privilege of being there to be part of that open door, to my little part in showing up to teach Bible study methods, basic doctrine. I taught 1 year. I taught how to preach the Bible, just some basic skills. I remember one time a young pastor came up to me. I remember what you preached. I remember what you taught us last year. And then he goes, you taught us to do this in a sermon, be true to the text, have a big idea, understand the culture and the background of the Bible. And he just listed off some things from my class. And he goes, I'm teaching other pastors in my area what you taught us. And I thought, oh man, it's all worth it right there. It's just all worth it right there. Last year at Grace Community Fellowship, we took a group of maybe 10 folks, came with me, and we built a boys' dormitory at a children's home. Nick, did you know that? Were you part of the church then?
No.
So you don't? Do you know anything about that?
Not at all.
Okay, so we needed $20,000 to help them with the costs, and so we took 10 people. They gathered all the materials, bricks and so forth. They had the foundation laid before we got there. And so we helped them construct this boys' dormitory, which was 2 stories. And so the first floor is being used for boys, and the second floor for teaching and conferences that they will hold there at this piece of property as well. So it's one of my philosophies of short-term missions is that we don't take charge. We're there to do what we're told. We don't want to come across as arrogant Americans and we have all the answers. They need to figure those things out. We're just there to rub shoulders and carry some bricks with them. I'm real proud of the team of people who came with me, and they, in a week, got this incredibly, fairly large building constructed. It was amazing to me. And with that, this children's home, they have kids. I'm struggling a little bit because I want to be careful not to say names or places right now, but they have a people group of kids that are with them who are very poor, and they live on the border of China, and they're a persecuted group. And most of these kids come to live with them. They do have parents, but the parents are too poor to give them education. Secondly, the girls in that culture are often kidnapped and raped, and then that's how they become wives of other people. So all of a sudden, this people group, many of them are becoming Christians, and they're resisting that culture of human trafficking and kidnapping and rape and so forth. And so they send them to this Christian couple where they can get educated. Only out of this people group, only one person has ever graduated from college. And the second one who's going to graduate from college is there right now with this couple. And I consider them my friends. They've actually been in my home. They've been here to Eugene. And many of us support their efforts. And so I'm very excited for them. My big concern right now is what's the future going to look for people like that? Will they be persecuted? What kind of pressure will the government put on them? What kind of pressure will they feel from the culture? Sometimes Americans have the idea that Buddhism is a very peaceful thing, but we got to face it. Every group of people have the propensity for violence, every group, and that can happen there as well. So I worry for their safety a little bit. I practice relaxed concern, so I'm not going to worry. And I'm just real thrilled with the kinds of things that our church has been able to do in supporting this children's home with these kids, and also the efforts of church planting and educating pastors. So in my experience being there, the country shifted from at first being lots of pressure and outside control from pressure and control from the military to a great easing, so much so that I could post social media things that I was there and what I was doing. And then in the last few weeks, the military has cracked down. They shut down the internet, and I'm sure that other groups are being pushed on and persecuted as well, as the government's pretty heavy-handed with things. I had planned to go back maybe in January, and it depended on COVID concerns. Now the concern is probably COVID won't be the concern. It's the military. Will we be able to get back into the country? One of the things that I'm very excited about is that the pastors' conference that I've been at 6 straight years, the Burmese pastor who's in charge of it said, we're getting to the point we don't need you anymore. We can take the material you've written and the things that the teaching team I'm with have produced, and we can replicate that ourselves. And it's time for us to take charge of teaching pastors in our country. That's just fantastic. It's handing off the baton and making sure that pastors can be trained, and they can train their people in their churches, and they can train other pastors. And to me, that's a great win for the gospel moving forward, the good news. So yes, Myanmar's been in the news, and so we'll just have to wait and see what happens with the military and with the freedom that they were experiencing that may have been erased quickly in the last few weeks. Nick, have you heard any of this stuff, or is this all brand new to you?
This is all brand new to me. I don't really keep up on the news very much, so I had no idea about this. But one thing that I am kind of curious about is that as far as political affiliation goes, does Myanmar have any country or nation that they're allied with who is able to help them out in this time and sort of bring peace and democracy back?
Well, I I would assume that Western countries like the United States would be trying to apply pressure for those things that you're talking about. And in realistically, what can they do? There's probably not a lot. So one of the things that Western powers, Western countries can do is to put financial squeeze on Myanmar. So the first year I went, let me give you an example of financial squeeze. I couldn't use my American credit card there. So American banks were not allowed to do business with the country of Myanmar. So that's a financial squeeze. The flip side of that is that Chinese money flowed into that country. Unbelievable. There are 20 big skyscrapers going up. Last time I was there, it was all funded by the Communist Party of China. And so those things are, I think it's Western countries putting pressure on, but I doubt if it's going to be very successful. Yeah. So at Grace, moving forward, I had planned to lead another team there to build a girls' dormitory. And I've been in discussions, and I'm also was trying to work with another pastor in Myanmar and another pastor in America that I'm good friends with, of bringing his team to assist in building another pastor's training center in another part of Myanmar. So some of those things might be put on hold. We'll just have to wait and see. And I hope for the best. One of my goals for our church anyway is that we would fall in love with the people group and really pour ourselves into a location and a group of people. Develop relationships, because it's all about relationships. Instead of just showing up and building a house and then never going back to that location, which is a lot of missions work sometimes. But going back over and over again, developing relationships with people is critical and crucial when it comes to missions in the world.
That reminds me of the phrase, if you give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day. But if you teach a man to fish, then he'll eat forever, I guess. I think that's how the saying goes. But anyways, just the idea that the point of this mission work is to empower the people and to also build leadership that then continues and builds and creates more leaders.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what I've been reading in the newspaper, and that's my limited exposure. I'm no expert on Myanmar. Yeah, I've been there only 6 times, but that's been my experiences with, and I have other stories about that. I'll just tell a brief one. A pastor I talked to once, I said, how many, is it difficult to see somebody follow Jesus who is in a Buddhist culture? He said it'd be easier to remove the tooth of it from a tiger than to see a Buddhist become a follower of Jesus. And the whole point was in that metaphor was that it's just very difficult because Buddhism is so ingrained in those cultures for people to cross the line of faith and come to Jesus and start following Jesus. One other brief story. My first time there, the main instructor who I went with asked the pastors, what do you need to do to go to heaven? They came up with a list of 13 things you need to do to go to heaven. Like be baptized, tithe, be a good person, do these good works. And then they began to list out which good works you had to do. Because Buddhism is wrapped up in good works. If I'm a good person, I get reincarnated as something even better, right? And so that concept of grace was foreign to them. It was foreign. So we've had a big emphasis upon it's faith alone and Christ alone. It's about God's grace. You don't have to perform. You have to do these. You don't have to get these things off your checklist in order to go to heaven. And that was just eye-opening to them. And it was exciting to see the light bulb come on as they read Scripture and understood God's grace. Well, that's all I got for Myanmar, Nick. But I just want to tell everybody grace and peace to you. And that was Stuff with Steve.